The first president of Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah, and the president of Burkina Faso between 1983 to 1987, Thomas Sankara, are without a doubt two of the greatest and most loved leaders in Africa's history. With Sankara coming into power 11 years after the passing of Nkrumah and only being a teenager during the period Nkrumah led Ghana, the paths of the two leaders never crossed. But there are many striking similarities between the two great leaders, from their undiluted love for the people, to their fearless defense of Africa's best interests, to the sabotage and attacks that they faced. This video seeks to highlight the many common links between Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah and Burkina Faso's Thomas Sankara, two leaders who exemplify uprightness and selflessness and serve as the embodiment of the ideal African leader. Kwame Nkrumah was without a doubt the African leader who campaigned and fought the hardest for African unity. On the very night that Ghana became an independent state, Nkrumah made clear his belief in Pan-Africanism from the get-go by proclaiming to the world that the independence of Ghana is meaningless unless it is linked up with the total liberation of the African continent. Backing up his words with action, Nkrumah will go on to provide vital support to liberation movements all across Africa, and also serve as the driving force behind the Casablanca Group, which advocated for the immediate continental unification of Africa.
Only a united Africa under a union government can cure us of our economic ills and lift us out of our despair and frustration. I make this sincere and serious appeal to you in the interest of our common progress, our security, and our future well-being.
Unfortunately, all of this did not result in the realization of his dream of African unity, but some 17 or so years later, Thomas Sankara will come to power and pick up where Nkrumah left off by also strongly advocating for African unity. Like Nkrumah, Sankara supported liberation movements across Africa. Most notable was Burkina Faso's strong opposition to the apartheid regime in South Africa and support for Nelson Mandela and his ANC fighters. In fact, when Burkina Faso officially changed their passports, the first copy was issued to Nelson Mandela, who was then in prison. Again, like Nkrumah, Sankara knew that the serious problems that weigh down African countries can only be effectively dealt with on a continental basis and with a united front. This saw Sankara make what many consider to be his most important speech at the Organization of African Unity Summit in Addis Ababa on the 29th of July 1987. The speech, titled The United Front Against the Debt, saw Sankara calling on all African leaders at the time to come together and collectively take a stand against the massive debt that was suffocating their economies.
Nous estimons que la dette s'analyse d'abord de par ses origines. Les origines de la dette remontent aux origines du colonialisme. Ceux qui nous ont prêté de l'argent, ce sont ceux-là qui nous ont colonisés. Ce sont les mêmes qui géraient nos États et nos économies. Ce sont les colonisateurs qui endettaient l'Afrique auprès des bailleurs de fonds, leurs frères et cousins. Nous étions étrangers à cette dette. Nous ne pouvons donc pas la payer.
Rightly noting that if individual African leaders decided to stop paying the debt, they will be easily eliminated one after the other, Sankara called for all the 50 African heads of state at the time to stand together in rejecting the debt, as that was the safest and the most effective way out. As he put it, if Burkina Faso alone were to refuse to pay the debt, I wouldn't be at the next conference. On the other hand, with the support of all, which I greatly need, with the support of all, we can avoid pain. And if we can avoid pain, we can devote our meager resources to our development.
Je voudrais que très sagement, vous nous offriez des solutions. Je voudrais que notre conférence adopte la nécessité de dire clairement que nous ne pouvons pas payer la dette. Non pas dans un esprit belliqueux, belliciste. Ceci pour éviter que nous n'allions individuellement nous faire assassiner. Si le Burkina Faso tout seul refuse de payer la dette, je ne serai pas là à la prochaine conférence. Par contre, avec le soutien de tous, dont j'ai besoin, avec le soutien de tous, nous pourrons éviter de payer.
Just 2.5 months after this speech, Sankara will be brutally assassinated. Nigerian music legend Fela Kuti, on hearing the tragic news about Sankara's passing, had this to say: "His departure is a terrible blow to African politics because he was the only one advocating for African unity, which is what Africa needs to advance. He was the only one speaking."
This African Union now. There is no time to waste. We must unite or we perish.
We live in a world of contradictions. These contradictions, however, keep the world going. Let me explain what I mean. Ghana is a small but very dynamic, independent African state. We are trying to reconstruct our economy and to build a new, free, and equal society. To do this, we must attain control of our own economic and political destinies. Only thus can we create higher living standards for our people and free them from the legacies and hazards of a colonial past and from the encroachments of neo-colonialism.
Right after Ghana achieved the significant milestone of political independence on the 6th of March 1957, Nkrumah reminded Ghanaians that another more important battle lay ahead which they had to fight and win. This was the battle for economic independence, without which political independence would be meaningless. Nkrumah called on the people to work extra hard as they were now working for themselves and their children, and not for the benefit of colonial powers. The rewards for this, Nkrumah told them, would be national and individual dignity, plus the satisfaction which comes from the creation of a higher standard of living. This emphasis on self-reliance and the quest to attain economic independence will remain the fundamental guide for Nkrumah throughout his years as Ghana's Prime Minister and later President. From being heavily dependent on the export of raw cocoa and not having any domestic industries by the time of independence, Ghana under Nkrumah will come to have over 100 industries that were adding value to Ghana's abundant raw materials. Nearly 2 decades after Nkrumah's pioneering example, Thomas Sankara will take power in Burkina Faso and also re-echo the same message of attaining economic independence through self-reliance, correctly recognizing that the system of foreign aid was not designed to help African countries build themselves into being prosperous, but rather keep them perpetually dependent. Sankara called on his people to roll up their sleeves and build Burkina Faso by themselves. As he rightly noted, he who feeds you controls you.
Notre pays produit suffisamment de quoi nous nourrir. Nous pouvons dépasser même notre production, malheureusement. Par manque d'organisation, nous sommes encore obligés de tendre la main pour demander des aides alimentaires. Ces aides alimentaires qui nous bloquent, qui nous inspirent, qui installent dans nos esprits cette habitude, ces réflexes de mendiant, d'assister. Nous devons mettre de côté ces aides par notre grande production. Il faut réussir à produire plus. Produire plus. Produire plus parce que il est normal que celui qui vous donne à manger vous dicte également ses volontés. ne consommons que ce que nous contrôlons.
To ensure that his people did not depend on others for food, Nkrumah provided extensive support to Ghanaian farmers and also established state farms to ensure that Ghana became self-sufficient in food production and also to provide ample raw materials for the many industries that had been established. Thomas Sankara will also do similar years later with his deliberate policies to support and encourage Burkinabe farmers to boost food production for domestic consumption and also to supply the local industries. The Sankara government also used the slogan, "Let's produce and consume Burkinabe," to encourage manufacturers to produce more from local raw materials and consumers to buy more goods made locally.
Kilo de blé par hectare, c'est la moyenne de la région, c'est la moyenne sahélienne de la région, donc en Afrique. Eh bien, en 86 déjà, le Burkina, par hectare, dépassait les 3800, 3900 kilos de blé par hectare. Donc, en Afrique, une réforme agraire, je veux dire, qui a impliqué un changement de propriété, les maîtres de la terre perdaient leur pouvoir, l'impôt de captation qui disparaissait et l'engrais qui arrivait, l'irrigation qui arrivait, une efficacité. Il a vaincu la faim, il a fait que le Burkina, en 4 ans, est devenu alimentairement autosuffisant. Donc, c'est quelque chose de tout à fait exceptionnel et tout à fait remarquable.
Kwame Nkrumah also championed the concept of the African personality and took steps to make Ghanaians believe in themselves and be proud of their roots. He established the Young Pioneer Movement, a youth organization that was focused on training young Ghanaians to not only be disciplined and responsible, but to also be proud of their African roots.
We want, therefore, to develop our own community and an African personality. Others may feel that they have evolved the very best way of life, but we are not bound, like slavish imitators, to accept it as our mold. If we find the methods used by others are suitable to our social environment, we shall adopt or adapt them. If we find them unsuitable, we shall reject them.
Thomas Sankara will make similar efforts in Burkina Faso by encouraging his people to be proud of their roots and live as Africans. He also set up the Institute of the Black People to help reverse the colonial teaching that the white race is superior to all other races.
En sorte également que le marché africain soit le marché des Africains. Produire en Afrique, transformer en Afrique et consommer en Afrique. Produisons ce dont nous avons besoin et consommons ce que nous produisons au lieu d'importer. Le Burkina Faso est venu vous exposer ici la cotonnade produite au Burkina Faso, tissée au Burkina Faso, cousue au Burkina Faso pour habiller les Burkinabés. Ma délégation et moi-même, nous sommes habillés par nos tisserands, nos paysans. Il n'y a pas un seul fil qui vienne de l'Europe ou de l'Amérique. Je ne fais pas un défilé de mode, mais je voudrais simplement dire que nous devons accepter de vivre africain. C'est la seule façon de vivre libre et de vivre digne. Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président. La patrie ou la mort, nous vaincrons.
In their determination to achieve economic independence for their countries, both Kwame Nkrumah and Thomas Sankara understood that they could not be beholden to any superpower or geopolitical camp. Both leaders were in power when the Cold War was raging, and there was the West and East divide. Virtually all countries in Africa and elsewhere were being forced to take sides in this conflict between two great powers. But there were some leaders who rightly recognized that it was inimical to the interest of their countries to pick a side in a battle that wasn't theirs to fight. This saw the creation of the non-aligned movement in 1961 by leaders who preferred to be neutral in the Cold War rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union. One of the 5 founders of the non-aligned movement was Kwame Nkrumah, who made it clear that Ghana was going to pursue a policy of positive neutrality in the context of the Cold War. This meant that Ghana was going to pursue good relations with both the Eastern and the Western blocs and form opinions on global issues based on their merit. As a direct consequence of this bold stance by Nkrumah, many Western politicians and journalists accused him of being anti-Western and pro-Soviet. For the West, choosing to be non-aligned was unacceptable. For them, you were either with them or against them. This led to a campaign to demonize Kwame Nkrumah and undermine his government at every turn. Thomas Sankara will come on the scene years later and follow in the footsteps of Nkrumah by becoming an integral member of the non-aligned movement. In a speech at the 8th Summit of the Non-Aligned Movement, held in Harare, Zimbabwe in September 1986, Thomas Sankara lamented about the increasing weakness of the movement, some 25 years after it was founded by Kwame Nkrumah and the 4 other leaders. He also raised the real problem of the debt burden, which was afflicting virtually all members of the non-aligned movement, and called for a collective resistance. This was a little under a year before his United Front Against the Debt speech at the OAU in 1987. For Sankara's refusal to be under the influence of France and the broad Western bloc, but rather chart an independent and non-aligned path, he will face the demonization and sabotage Nkrumah suffered many years earlier. Just as Kwame Nkrumah and Thomas Sankara were insisting on being non-aligned and neutral in the Cold War, there were also other African leaders who were fully committed to being under the influence and control of the West. The most prominent amongst these leaders was Ivorian President Félix Houphouët-Boigny, who was fully committed to defending the interests of France and the West in Africa. This saw him working hard to undermine African nationalist leaders like Kwame Nkrumah and Sékou Touré in the 1960s, and later doing the same to Thomas Sankara. Houphouët-Boigny provided refuge and support for the enemies of Kwame Nkrumah, who sought to eliminate him at all costs. These anti-Nkrumah elements were able to stage attacks in Ghana and escape to the safe haven Houphouët-Boigny provided for them in Ivory Coast. But he was not alone in this, as the leaders of Ghana's other neighbors in Togo, Burkina Faso, Benin and Niger all joined hands to undermine and isolate the progressive nationalist government of Kwame Nkrumah. Thomas Sankara, like Nkrumah, will face the same opposition from the pro-Western leaders in West Africa, especially from Côte d'Ivoire's Houphouët-Boigny. Fearful of Sankara's progressive and nationalist outlook, Houphouët-Boigny did all he could to undermine the government of Thomas Sankara. Fidel Kientega, the man who served as Sankara's foreign policy advisor, witnessed firsthand all the machinations by external forces and had this to say on the matter. Burkina Faso is a landlocked country surrounded by Mali, Ivory Coast, Ghana, Benin, Togo, and Niger. The citizens of these countries were very receptive to Sankara's idea of the African way. The puppets of neocolonialism like Houphouët-Boigny feared an overspill effect in these countries and worked against Sankara. On the relationship between Houphouët-Boigny and Sankara, this is Fidel Kientega's personal account. It was not an easy one. When Sankara visited Houphouët-Boigny, I was there. He told Sankara, "I understand that you are young and full of energy. Our young people like you, and they see you as a source of inspiration for change. We don't want change. It is not good for us. Change your program." Sankara told him, "I respect your wisdom, but it is fair to give the young people the chance to lead change towards self-determination and fulfillment."
Voyez-vous, l'impérialisme a tort. Mais l'impérialisme est un mauvais élève. Quand il est battu, quand il est renvoyé de la classe, il revient encore. Il n'a jamais appris la leçon de son échec. Il est là-bas en Afrique du Sud, en train d'étaler, en train d'égorger les Africains. simplement parce que ces Africains pensent à la liberté comme vous aujourd'hui. L'impérialisme, il est là-bas, en train d'écraser les peuples arabes, c'est le sionisme. L'impérialisme est partout. Cet impérialisme, c'est encore lui qui a assassiné les Lumumba, les Cabral, les Kwame Nkrumah.
But the efforts to undermine and eliminate Kwame Nkrumah and Thomas Sankara were not only limited to the pro-Western African leaders who were happy to act in foreign interests. Foreign powers like France, especially in the case of Thomas Sankara, and the United States in the case of Kwame Nkrumah, did a lot to sabotage and eventually get rid of both leaders. First were the underhanded efforts at economic sabotage. This saw the deliberate forcing down of the world price of cocoa in order to deal a severe blow to Ghana's economy. Ghana, after independence, was heavily reliant on the export of cocoa, and even though Kwame Nkrumah was working hard to diversify Ghana's economy, that process was not going to happen overnight. The foreign powers that opposed Nkrumah knew this and used Ghana's reliance on cocoa exports to undermine the economy in order to cause discontent amongst Ghanaians and create the conditions for a military coup, which eventually happened as planned by the same foreign powers and their Ghanaian collaborators. The case was no different years later with Sankara, as covert efforts were made to damage Burkina Faso's economy and create problems for Sankara. This is how Sankara himself put it in an interview he had with Swiss journalist Jean-Philippe Rapp in 1985. A systematic boycott of exports from Burkina is being organized in order to strangle us economically and cause problems between us and the growers. Take the example of cattle. Our country is a big exporter of livestock, yet we are currently having problems. They are refusing to buy our livestock, or else they place such unacceptable conditions on us that there's no way we can export it. But the boycott is carried out in the area of imports too, especially with regard to products we need urgently. Pressure is exerted to prevent us from importing the quantity of cement we need for general construction work. They know that by depriving us of such materials, we will have a lot of workers on our construction sites who will end up turning against us, thinking we are nothing but demagogues. We have sent out information and goodwill delegations to explain to as many people as possible that our revolution is not aimed against other peoples and that they have no reason to attack us. In the future, however, we will be forced to consider this kind of provocative gesture as grounds for war. Sankara is then asked by Rapp if he considers the economic sabotage as being retaliation for some of his international positions. This was his response. You are right. The positions we take don't always make people happy, but we face a dilemma. We either remain silent on positions we believe to be correct, consciously lying in order to enjoy the good graces of those who can help us, to please our delicate and powerful partners, or we tell the truth in the firm conviction that we are helping our own people and others. As mentioned earlier, the economic sabotage was done to create the conditions for the removal of the targeted leaders, in this case Kwame Nkrumah and Thomas Sankara.
Osajifo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, the founder of our nation, envisioned an industrialized, self-reliant Ghana, whose citizens have the highest standard of economic life and the greatest sense of self-esteem rooted in patriotism and Pan-African unity. But on February 24, 1966, a joint military and police coup d'etat shattered that dream, plunging Ghana into decades of instability and military takeovers. The verdict of history is now loud and clear. Declassified documents from the United States archives reveal that this was a coup inspired and engineered by the CIA. This remains the most regrettable and darkest moment in our nation's history. That moment sparked a series of historical events that have set us back and significantly delayed our attainment of the objectives of nationhood.
The involvement of Western intelligence agencies in the overthrow of the Kwame Nkrumah government has long been established. The involvement of the CIA in financing and encouraging the coup plotters in Ghana is known to have been vital to the coup's eventual success. And a memo from Robert Koma, the President's acting Special Assistant for National Security Affairs, to President Lyndon Johnson, just days after the 1966 coup in Ghana, makes clear why the United States was so invested in getting rid of Nkrumah. In the words of Koma, Nkrumah was doing more to undermine our interest than any other black African. In the case of Sankara, the hand of France in his assassination is most clearly seen in the fact that Colonel Gilbert Diendere, the man under whom his murderers directly served, and who later was made the chief of staff and the head of the Presidential Security Regiment by Blaise Compaoré, was given a national award by France. He was given France's National Order of the Legion of Honor. The National Order of the Legion of Honor is known to be the highest and the most prestigious French national award. The award is to honor individuals for distinguished service to France. This is the national award that the commander of Sankara's murderers was given by France. Another commonality between Kwame Nkrumah and Thomas Sankara that provoked the intense hostility they faced from the West was their refusal to accept IMF loans due to the conditions attached to it. In the case of Nkrumah, the forcing down of the world price of cocoa had caused serious economic problems, and Nkrumah had to seek assistance. But this dire situation was not enough to make him accept a loan from the IMF due to the political conditions attached to it. In his book Dark Days in Ghana, Nkrumah talks about how Western powers deliberately sabotaged Ghana's economy so that they could cause its overthrow. The USA and Britain could, if they had wanted, have fixed a reasonable price for cocoa and so have eased the economic situation in Ghana. They had no wish to do so. On the contrary, the forcing down of the price of cocoa was part of their policy of preparing the economic ground for political action in the form of a coup and a change of government. Throughout 1965 and before then, the US government exerted various other forms of economic pressure on Ghana. This pressure ended smartly after 24 February 1966, when the US State Department's political objective had been achieved. The price of cocoa suddenly rose on the world market, and the IMF rushed to the aid of the NLC. Years later, Thomas Sankara will also refuse any loans from the IMF, as he considered it not to be in the best interest of his people. His foreign policy advisor, Fidel Kientega, perfectly captures Sankara's outlook on foreign aid. Sankara did not dictate to the people or force them to work. He told them about the mechanisms of getting loans from the Bretton Woods institutions and France. He said that they could relax at home and ask him to borrow money from the new colonialists, but that they would have to bear in mind that they and their children would have to pay back the loans with interest. Consequently, his government would find it difficult to provide universal education and healthcare because he would have to spend a greater chunk of the meager tax revenues in servicing the debt. They could also beg for aid, but then they would remain beggars forever. The people got the message and were motivated into working harder. Sankara led the people into taking their destiny into their own hands by being open and honest with them. For his determination to ensure the sovereignty of his country and the dignity of his people like Nkrumah before him, Sankara paid the ultimate price. For being independent-minded, non-aligned and Pan-Africanist, Kwame Nkrumah and Thomas Sankara were seen as being out of line by those who believe Africa is theirs to control. So there was always bound to be a reaction, a counter-revolution. In Ghana, this happened on the 24th of February 1966, when traitors in the Ghana army and police took power in a bloody coup. In Nkrumah's own words, the counter-revolutionary nature of the military police regime in Ghana became obvious within hours of its establishment. Steps were taken immediately by the NLC to destroy our socialist gains and achievements and to end Ghana's active participation in the African Revolution. In other words, we were to witness the all too familiar pattern and techniques of an imperialist and neo-colonialist attack through a puppet government on both socialism and the African continental struggle for liberation and unity. Ghana was thrown wide open, as in colonial days, to all the foreign exploitation we had worked so hard to end. The imperialist press, reflecting the jubilation in government circles in London, Washington, Bonn, Salisbury, and Johannesburg, displayed such headings as "Ghana swings to the west," "The new Ghana moves westwards," and "Ghana comes to heel." Ghana was being sold into political and economic slavery. In Burkina Faso, after eliminating Thomas Sankara, the traitor Blaise Compaoré quickly turned to the IMF in a complete reversal of Sankara's self-reliance policies and rejection of the Bretton Woods institution. From having a focus on domestic production for consumption and export, Burkina Faso went back to being dependent on foreign imports and the many local producers who were thriving under Sankara were dealt a fatal blow. The same was the case in Ghana after the overthrow of Kwame Nkrumah, as Nkrumah himself put it. For the mass of Ghanaian workers, peasants and farmers, the victims of the capitalist free-for-all, it meant a return to the position of drawers of water and hewers of wood to Western capitalism. Another commonality between Kwame Nkrumah and Thomas Sankara is the systematic efforts made by the traitors to demonize them in the eyes and minds of the people. In Ghana, a great effort was made to destroy all the documents and books of Nkrumah or those related to him. Propaganda campaigns were undertaken to paint him in the worst light possible, and all kinds of allegations of corruption were made against him. There were the baseless claims of Nkrumah having stolen millions, which he had stashed in foreign bank accounts. Western media joined in this campaign of lies against Kwame Nkrumah. In response to these false claims, Nkrumah wrote, "I am alleged to have stolen millions. In fact, I have no money outside Ghana, except for the sums which have been paid to me after the coup, as royalties on my books, and which are now paid into the London branch of the National Commercial Bank of Scotland. I never handled any money personally for any external or internal purposes, and this included my own salary. All drawing, both on my governmental and my personal accounts, was countersigned by civil servants who were responsible to the Auditor General for all public expenditure and who, for my own purposes, recorded my personal expenditure. Any one of these officials could have produced a full and valid statement of how every penny was dealt with by the President's office and exactly how my own salary was spent by me personally. If this had been done, it would have shown that I refused to accept, as a political gesture, any of the expense allowances allotted to the President by law. In the same way, if my will had been published in full, it would have shown that I left nothing even to my own family, but bequeathed everything I did possess to the party and the state." In Burkina Faso, the traitors who eliminated Thomas Sankara also deployed the same dirty tactics of lies and propaganda to deceive the people about his true nature. An anti-Sankara propaganda campaign was launched, and rallies were organized to tell the people that Campari and his goons had liberated them from Sankara's tyranny. They also tried to paint Sankara as being corrupt and a womanizer. A serious effort was made to destroy all documents and information that showed the true nature of Sankara, just like what happened in Ghana in 1966. Today, many of the archive material on Thomas Sankara are from foreign sources, just as is the case with Kwame Nkrumah, all because of traitors who were more than happy to reverse the process of economic liberation that Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah and Burkina Faso's Thomas Sankara were overseeing. This video will be incomplete if I end it without highlighting the common trait of selflessness in both Kwame Nkrumah and Thomas Sankara. It is this selflessness that saw them constantly put the interests of the people above their own personal interests. Kwame Nkrumah led Ghana for 15 years, first as Prime Minister and later as President, and yet he did not have a house to his name.
Even the house which the land was given to him, the house which he built with the help of strong women supporters, entrepreneurs at the time, which is today Pedwasi Lodge, where I was born, that could have been our house, but he gave it to the state. It's the property of the Republic of Ghana, receiving dignitaries just as he wanted it to be. So we, from personal experience, we knew that our father didn't amass wealth. Our father wasn't interested in those kind of things.
Your father didn't have a house?
He did not. Strangely, incredibly, he did not.
Wow.
Thomas Sankara was barely different, as he also showed no interest in using political power to acquire personal wealth. His foreign advisor perfectly captured the revolutionary leadership style of Sankara in these words. His children were peddled to school on the backseat of bicycles. We raised concerns about their safety, but Sankara said he wanted his children to grow up modestly, like every normal Burkinabe child. Can you imagine the children of an African president on bikes to school? That was Thomas Sankara. The empowerment of women is also another commonality between Kwame Nkrumah and Thomas Sankara. For both leaders, women deserved equal rights and a place at the table, and they both took significant steps to make this a reality. In 1960, Kwame Nkrumah organized Ghanaian female activists and got them to form the National Council of Ghana Women. He said, "Go ahead and organize the women and form them into one great organization. We must then arrange for them to go into the institutions and factories and take over. They could select their candidates for training in the various skills and disciplines. Ghana must forge ahead and be a shining example in industrialization and other fields of endeavor for the whole of Africa. And we cannot succeed if we left our women behind in this great march. Our women must take over completely as private secretaries, stenographers, and copy typists. They should branch into engineering services, pharmacy, bus and taxi driving, law and medicine, and all other fields. They should go shoulder to shoulder with our men and advance the socialist cause of progress and prosperity for Ghana." Years later, Ture Adamafio will look back on the creation of the National Council of Ghana Women and note sadly, "Nkrumah was very happy with the great success I achieved in organizing these women. Plans were laid to send women abroad for medicine, law, engineering, business administration, secretaryship, cooperative studies, pure scientific pursuits, and general education, also as factory operatives and skilled workers in many other fields of human endeavor. We took some of their leaders to the Eastern Tour in 1961, and the organization held a great promise to the nation and posed a great threat to men, but its fire was smothered on the 24th February 1966 by the Kotoka coup, which toppled the CPP regime. In Burkina Faso between 1983 to 1987, Thomas Sankara will also work hard to empower women. He appointed several women to cabinet positions, including as ministers of family affairs, culture, health, and the budget. In each of the last two cabinets under Sankara in 1986 and 1987, the number of women reached 5, about a fifth of the total. Previous governments had at best 1 or 2 women ministers. Other women were appointed as judges, department prefects, provincial high commissioners, and directors of state enterprises such as the National Airline, Television Network, and Foreign Trade Agency. Sankara also stopped the practice of sending pregnant female students out of school, banned female circumcision and other harmful traditional practices. Women who enlisted into the army had an equal chance of promotion through merit and were fully trained in all military skills.
Comment constatons l'émancipation des filles?
Il faudrait qu'ici aussi nous commencions à nous débarrasser de cet art féodal. Ce sont des arts féodales, de l'éducation féodale, qui nous a dit que le garçon est toujours au-dessus de la fille. À l'école même, quand les filles sont en grossesse ou des choses comme ça, on les renvoie, n'est-ce pas? On les exclut. Mais on ne cherche même pas à savoir si le partenaire avec lequel elle a eu la grossesse là ne se trouve pas par hasard dans la classe. Et même s'il s'y trouve, on le laisse lui, le garçon. Donc le garçon peut faire autant d'enfants qu'il veut. Dès la 6e, s'il commence à faire des enfants, jusqu'en terminale, on ne le renverra jamais. Mais la fille, même si elle est à 1 jour de son bac, elle fait un enfant, allez, renvoyer. Ce qui veut dire que nous devons donner à chaque femme un emploi. Nous devons donner à chaque femme le moyen de gagner honnêtement et dignement sa vie.
On this high note, I conclude my efforts at highlighting the many common links between the first president of Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah, and the president of Burkina Faso between 1983 and 1987, Thomas Sankara. Just as the vision and actions of these two brave and selfless sons of Africa have a lot in common, so too does the efforts at sabotaging them by those who hated and opposed them also have a lot in common. The parallels are striking and undeniable. Hopefully this video serves to enlighten all those who come across it in some way, shape or form. If you appreciate our work with this video, please do make it a point to support us in any way possible so we can keep this going. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like this video, and share it to others. It goes a long way. Asante sana.